Hey everyone, a quick note before we begin. This episode was originally recorded in the spring of 2021. It was published by HowlRound Theatre Commons on October 20th, 2021. Hi, and welcome to the Theater History Podcast. Kunqu is one of the most important forms of Chinese drama, and it's got a long and complicated history. Today, we're fortunate to have Dr. Dongshin Chang with us on the show to introduce us to Kunqu and explain how it fits into the larger context of the Chinese performing arts tradition. Dongshin is an associate professor of theater at Hunter College, who's an expert on Kunqu and has both written about it and translated a number of plays. Dongshin, thank you for joining us.
And thanks a lot for your invitation, Mike.
Can you give us some cultural and historical context to start? Where does Kunqu come from, and when did it begin to develop?
Sure. In Chinese, the term Kunqu consists of two words: Kun, which is a shorthand for the region of Kunshan near the cities of Suzhou and Shanghai in China, and Qu, which means melody or song. Therefore, Kunqu literally means the music style from Kunshan. In the mid-16th century, Kunqu became popular by, as its name indicates, its new and distinctive music style that is usually characterized as flowing, sophisticated, and elegant. This new music style is attributed to the work of the musician Wei Liangfu, who resided in the Kunshan region and refined earlier music styles to create a new one, the Kunqu. And so soon plays were written and performed in this new music style from Kunshan. Then Kunqu gradually gained popularity, spread beyond the region, and then attained nationwide appreciation. As of today, Kunqu has been in existence for more than 400 years. So that's a very long history. And then I will say that in the long history of Kunqu, I observe that they are, in terms of its developments can be divided into three periods: the Golden Age, the era of actable plays, and this is the term I will explain very soon, actable plays, and the period of survival and revival. So during its Golden Age, which is from the mid-16th to the mid-18th centuries, there were many plays written and performed in the Kunqu style, building both elite and popular followings. Then during the era of actable plays, which is from the mid-18th to the late 19th centuries, it was performers rather than playwrights who advanced the Kunqu art and sustained its popularity through the creation and performance of what I call actable plays. And then lastly, during the survival and revival period, which is from the late 19th century until now, Kunqu lost popular appeal to other forms of traditional Chinese theater, such as Jingju, popularly known as Peking or Beijing opera, and other forms, and almost died out in commercial theater in the early 20th century, but received rekindled interest and attention in the late 20th century. So it's great that Kunqu is still around.
Yeah, I think one of the most kind of wonderful things about this is you're talking about this form, and it's got centuries of history, but it's also something that you can see today. And I'm wondering, what does a Kunqu performance look and sound like on stage?
To answer this question, I will need to provide a bit of explanations of the so-called traditional Chinese theater, or popularly known as Chinese opera. and its performance, because Kunqu is one of the many forms that have been categorized under this umbrella term, like traditional Chinese theater or Chinese opera. So as early as the 13th and 14th centuries, China had developed a very distinct style of theater that was very musical, with singing as its structural core, like lots of singing, and performers who performed in stylized costumes and makeup and movements. And since then, many forms of theater in China took shape and then share these very common practices in stage performance. So if I'm going to answer your question, then a Kunqu performance will have, when you go see it, you will see performers who perform in stylized costumes, makeup, and stylized movements, and who will sing a lot, I would say in most plays. Not in all plays, but they will, like, singing is so important in traditional Chinese theater. So actually, I would like to call it as musical theater. No, that it's like Chinese kind of musical theater. And then, and also in this very characteristic Kunqu music style. And so I believe that if we see a clip, would help make sense of these like descriptions, and then I think that maybe this would be a good place. I could provide a clip, and I have a clip in mind. Probably it's from the Peony Pavilion, from like A Stroll in the Garden. We could just like ask the viewer just to watch a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt the interview for a moment, because for this episode, we're going to do something just a little different. Dongshin has kindly provided us with a clip of a performance of a classic Kunqu work called The Peony Pavilion. If you're able, I'd encourage you to pause this episode and look at our show notes, which you can find on howlround.com. There's a YouTube link there to part 1 of the performance. You can watch the whole thing in 2 parts, which I'd encourage you to do. It's really wonderful. But for now, you can stick to this opening scene. It starts around 1 minute and 30 seconds into the clip, and it lasts about 3 minutes total. It's okay if you can't watch the video. You'll still get to hear the gorgeous music and singing in the audio for this episode. But if you're able, check out this brief portion, because you'll get to see the amazing costumes and performers and have a little bit more of a sense of what Kunqu looks like as Dongshin helps us learn more about it.
So that is a clip from the Peony Pavilion, from the scene. The Garden Visit, that's my translation, depicting the young maiden Du Liniang when she wakes up in one spring morning, and then she's still in her chamber, and then so she comes into the stage, and then with her maid Chunxiang, and they shared a verse form, but put in the Kunqu music style. So that's what we saw.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, and not least the musical style, I think, is perhaps very different from what people who aren't familiar with Kunqu might expect. I wonder if you could just maybe talk a little bit more about particularly the way that the performers sing.
Right, you see that Chinese theater, as I earlier said, is a musical theater, right? But you see the use of the voice is very distinct. And then actually, earlier I mentioned that traditional Chinese theater, in this umbrella term, there are many, many different forms. And then they share these characteristics, like a stylized makeup, costuming, movement, and this kind of singing as the structural core, but they differ in terms of the kind of the vocal range, register, and then so that's definitely something that is really important. And then secondly is the like in Kunqu, I wonder if you heard the lead musical instrument is flute. So the lead musical instrument accompanies the singing, but in other forms they might have different kind of musical instruments as the lead musical instruments. For example, in Jingju, it's like it's two-string fiddles, and also I believe the range is much higher. The pitch is even higher. But in Kunqu, it's a little bit mellower, it's a bit lower, but still you have to sing into sort of like a falsetto, a bit like it, and also the position of the projection. So that's why sometimes when we say opera, it's a different kind because the projection, the vocal range is different, but it's a different way of singing. And as I said that you heard that Kunqu is known for many of these like romantic love stories. So there are quite a few like slower arias, but that doesn't mean that Kunqu doesn't have faster, lively arias. But in all, it has this kind of flowing arias that go up and down, a lot. But you have to kind of sing through that in a way to make it sound very like smooth, as if you are flowing like water. So that's what this musician did. Like many people like attribute him for this, revelation to combine earlier style to make Kunqu this kind of unique music style. So that's what I would say.
Thank you for that explanation. That's such a, I think, nuanced and really helpful way as a sort of introduction into this. I think for many listeners, it was probably a rather unfamiliar form, and it's really great to sort of get a sense of what's distinguishing it. So thank you for that. I'm just curious too, in terms of context, where and when are these plays performed, either today or perhaps historically?
And so maybe this is yes, we are now in the 21st century, right? And then for me, I have a very interesting journey. Actually, I came to North America in the late 1990s. And so actually, my exposure to Kunqu has mainly been in North America. And I'm from Taiwan, and I haven't been to China. So I always have to put this as a disclaimer. So it's kind of interesting that I learned a lot about Kunqu through the diasporic Chinese communities here. And I visited different cities in North America. So with that, I will share with the listeners what I know like in my study and also what I observe here and what I probably learned, from people who would I meet here mainly in New York City. So in the historical past, that Kunqu, if it's for public performance, Kunqu as a one form of public entertainment. Usually Kunqu was performed that are for religious or seasonal festivals. So then come together, they will perform at temples, markets, and set up these temporary where they will have all these temporary stages set up for these occasions, and then troops that perform Kunqu will go there perform for these occasions, and that will provide livelihood for these troops. And then of course we could get into more details about the troops, because they are troops that survive on these performance occasions. They also like temporarily troops formed by the locals. They will perform as dedication to the gods or to the festivals. So that's one about this. And then secondly, there's another place, like where and when. It's actually in pre-modern China. Maybe a little bit history about China. In 1912, China entered the Republic era, and before that, China was in all these monarchy, dynasties, right, with all these emperors, empresses, etc. So in pre-modern China, so that's what I call. In the pre-modern China, the social classes were very distinct, that you belong to different social classes. And so, unfortunately, performers were considered outcasts of these social classes. They did not even belong to one, because they are at the bottom. And so for another from the top of these social classes were the scholar elites, and they kept their own servants, private entertainers, for their banquets, self-amusements. So some of these performers would serve these a higher social class scholar elites, and that's when they would perform. So, and these scholar elites, they will also, because they have the knowledge and skills, they could compose that plays. And so sometimes they will have their own servant performers to perform for themselves. So that's another place for a performance. And lastly, during the pre-modern era, at large metropolis, that in big cities, where you have these entertainment districts. So you have the tea houses, taverns, and later on theater houses. Then you could go see the shows. And at that time, by that I meant probably later in these commercial establishments became very popular in the 19th century. But that's when the time when Kunqu lost its popular appeal. And so, but Kunqu was absorbed into other forms. Kunqu was still being performed, but not advertised as Kunqu, as some of the pieces. So I think these are for the pre-modern era. And then when China entered its republic eras, and then after the People's Republic of China was established, as well as where I'm from Taiwan. And so during the 20th century, I think they still are state-funded training school, and so you could have performers train there, and then you will have these commercial establishments. They will work with these troops and to provide opportunities for them to perform. But I would say do they still do the these traditional roles, like for the religious and seasonal festivals? Possibly, I think. But since Kunqu lost its popular appeal, maybe very few. That's my guess. I have to read a bit more. And then in terms of the North America context, I am part of a cultural arts organization called the Kunqu Society in New York City, and so we provide public programs, mostly free to low cost, in order to introduce this form to the general public. So we do shows at libraries, cultural arts venues, colleges, etc. So, and like the clip that you just saw was a troupe, the Shanghai Kunqu troupe, invited by the Kunqu Society when they came over to perform in 2016 at my school, Hunter College. So they performed at the Denicate Playhouse. So that's where it was performed.
You were just talking a little bit about some of the performers, both today and historically, who have done Kunqu. And you mentioned these training schools. Who becomes a Kunqu performer, and what does it take if you're enrolled in one of these training schools? What does it take to become a sort of recognized performer in this style?
In the historical past, during the pre-modern era, theater, as we talk about the social classes, right? So theater could be family business. So you You were raised in that environment. You perform with your family. Theater could be sort of like if you are a servant, your masters ask you to receive training. You could become performers for the master's, pleasure. Or you could be procured or be bought by troupe owners if they are looking for, right, like performers. And usually these are children, like from the poor, the classes, so they may be an opportunity for them to earn money. And so usually they started young in the environment, and then they learn from either from the family members or from the troupe owners, from their masters, etc. And then during modern times, as I just mentioned about these state-funded training schools, I could give some examples from the teachers that I have been learning Kunqu from here in New York City. They relocated to North America after they received their training in China. So from what I learned is that they enter the training school young, at the age between 10 to 12, very young, and then they receive in general 8 years of training. And so then I believe that for the first few years they do basic training, and then they are separated into different role types depending on their look, their voice, what they can do. And then they learn all these different plays for these role types. And then after they graduate in their late teens or early 20s, and then they start to perform. And I learned that probably about the Cultural Revolution, that there was this one generation when they were in the training school, when they received training, it was during the Cultural Revolution. And then after that, they didn't have much. During the Cultural Revolution, basically the traditional forms were suppressed, were not allowed to be on stage. But it was after the Cultural Revolution the traditional forms came back. I believe that it was in the late 1980s and 90s they started to have more performance opportunities. And then there's something I will say that in 2001, Kunqu was proclaimed by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, in 2001 as one of the masterpieces of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. That gave lots of attention to Kunqu. So actually Kunqu had a kind of a revival in the early 21st century. So, and Kunqu became popular again. So, and so from my teacher's account, it takes a while to become proficient or, good in performing. So it takes at least, a decade for them to become good, and then they all train in one or just like very specific role types. And so they are, and then eventually I believe they mature, I'm going to say in their late 30s or 40s, and then they become like a master artist, and then they continue to refine and perform well into their 50s and 60s. So it's a lifelong like a profession.
You were mentioning role types there. I'm just curious, could you explain what those are and how they work a little bit within Kunqu?
Sure. That as I mentioned, that Kunqu belongs to this umbrella term, traditional Chinese theater, and then in all these different forms, that they all have this similar style of role types. Simply put, that they separate the roles in terms of training and performance into very basic, like in terms of gender, like a male, female, 生旦. So I think this is very, very basic, like a male, female. And then there's this a very specific role type called 镜, or later translated as painted face, like a larger than life character. And then 丑, clowns. So then under 生, male role type, there are sub role types, from like elderly, white, lao sheng, mature male, then xiao sheng meaning like a young male. Then in Kunqu, even under all these like male sub role types, Kunqu developed quite a few specific male role types that are very specific to Kunqu. They are all these like a state official, like a male, like a Wanshen, like a man with official rank, playing like all these like governmental officials to the emperor, and then another one called Jinshen, meaning like young scholars. Mainly they are playing like a romantic types, and then there's another kind called 智尾生. 智尾 meaning like it's because of their costume. They have these like really too long like feathers, like really long, and then usually they have like a martial art skills. And then in Kunqu there's also a destitute, poor scholars, 穷生, like because usually for the 精生 they are handsome in their early 20s or teens, young, good looking. But for the 穷生, because they fall in terms of their fortune, so they're poor in terms of their look, so it requires different kind of skills, performance styles to portray that kind of characters. So I would say that the role types, it might sound very generic, like man, woman, but actually it's quite complicated. I just described about the male, right? And then under Dan, female, then you have the elderly woman, mature women, young maiden, and vivacious, like a younger, like girls, right? And then etc. And also like Dan, that who have martial art skills, etc. So under each, if you want to, you are required to become really good at one specific type that will suit you well. And not to mention like even under Jing, the painted face, there are different kinds. Chou, there are also different kinds of clowns, and so these are the kind of larger categories in Kunqu. And I would say in terms of the categories, most forms of traditional Chinese theater follow these larger categories, but for each they all have these very specific sub categories. And then it depends on the repertoire, the kinds of plays, and also this long lineage of performance tradition. What kind of plays have been passed down from performers to performers, and what they are good at, and so they could train the next generation to perform certain plays.
Yeah, you're talking about these plays. We've talked a little bit about the performance, about who's doing the performing. What about the plays themselves? I understand that these are not performed the same way that you would perform, say, a 5-act Shakespeare drama.
And so earlier I mentioned that there are three, in my own observation, there are three like historical periods. And during the Golden Age, between the mid-16th until like a mid-18th century, there were many plays written for Kunqu, and many of the playwrights were scholar elites, and many of them actually wrote the plays for their own self-amusement and for their own troops. And so in that way, I question whether many of the plays have ever been performed in full, because they are very the plays are in the traditional Chinese styles. Oh, let me give the example of Peony Pavilion. For example, the playwright Tang Qianzu, by profession, was an official, but he resigned young due to his protests against certain policies, and then he retired, and then he started to compose plays. In the example of Peony Pavilion, it's a play of 55 scenes. So it's not only 5 acts. Just imagine there are 55 acts of the play involving, I would say, in my estimation, at least 100 characters, probably more than 100. And so it's quite impossible because it's a play with multiple plots. The romantic love story serves one, and there's this like a warring conflicts between like the countries, and eventually all these plots that they are disentangled toward the end, but the play could serve for reading pleasure as well, because usually the plays was set up like in scene one. Scene one already gives you the synopsis of the play. So if you just want to know the story, you just read scene one, then you'll read the synopsis. You'll know what the play is about. This is like kind of like the style of the script. So in terms of scripts, many of the scripts are long. And then earlier we just listened to this very short, right, aria. And then the music could be traced back to the probably early 18th century. So it's hard to imagine that, these plays were performed in full. And so there's something about this idea of the plays. And then so this is what happened, because they were records of plays being performed. If they were performed at these scholar elite households, it's possible they will perform in full length, because they could take 2 or 3 days, we'll take a break, right? And then in terms of the role types, so this is where the role types come into play, that they will separate. I mentioned that in the example of Peony Pavilion, probably there are more than 100 characters, but these characters could be separated into these role types. So if you are trained in one role type, you could play multiple characters if they belong to this role type, as long as they are not in the same scene. So as long as that you know that you're going to play different roles, but if they will belong to this role type. So actually it's like this idea of this kind of different compositions. So maybe the troupe might have, say that up to 10 to 15 performers, but they could do different roles. And that's already a large, pretty big, like a troupe, or like probably between 10 to 15. It's quite standard, but they could play that, plays that involve lots of different characters. So that's how they play these plays. But then earlier I mentioned that when you perform for these religious or seasonal festivals, probably the audience wouldn't be able to have this luxury to watch these plays in full. And that's when these ideas of the actable plays, that I think this idea started, in that the troupe would select highlights or excerpts from one play or from different plays, and to make an interesting program for the audience. So say that they would perform 2 scenes from the Peony Pavilion, another scene from a different play, etc. But they would showcase different kinds of characters and stories. So altogether, it will form an interesting program, because in Kunqu, even though many of the plays that are still being performed are mainly like a romantic love stories, but in Kunqu there are also histories that are folklore heroes, religious plays, etc. So there's a wide range. And so there are different kinds of characters. So you can play these plays. So there are many Kunqu plays that are still being performed, but we are not going to see them being performed in one play in its entirety. But we're seeing all these highlight scenes from these plays that have been modified by the performers. Of course, the playwrights will protest against this, right? But the performers that wanted to make these plays work for the audience, so they did a lot. They changed a lot to these plays, and so that's what I'm interested. As I learn, I'm still learning all these plays, and I noticed that actually very, very few of these plays in performance, the text is exactly the same as what the playwrights write. And so that's what I thought that's kind of interesting. And I would like to bring this to the listeners' attention.
You're talking about earlier the playwright Tang Xianzu, and you sometimes see these kind of odd comparisons maybe to Shakespeare, just because they happen to be alive at the same time. They're both these great playwrights in their separate parts of the world who are sort of great in their own right. But that does sort of make you think a little bit about the sort of historical perspective. I mean, this has been an art form, as you were saying earlier, that's been around for a few centuries. And it does make me wonder how people view Kunqu today. You mentioned a little earlier, it's gone through a little bit of a revival in the last couple of decades. Where does it sort of fit into the theatrical hierarchy in, say, the same way that Shakespearean drama fits into, for better or for worse, the theatrical hierarchy in the English language, English-speaking world?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. That and as I said, that I have been learning Kunqu in the North America context, and so probably I will speak from this view and from my observations. And I will say that ever since the proclamation by UNESCO, because the proclamation also asked the Chinese government to safeguard, preserve the art form, so it does help to elevate Kunqu, to this is like a world heritage, to that, status, and also efforts were made to promote Kunqu, to make it popular. And so I will speak a little bit about the Kunqu Society in that the earlier, when the organization was founded, it was definitely founded, I see, again, from people from the higher social class, from the, if in the pre-modern era, probably would be the scholarly, like equivalent to that class, people who receive Chinese literary education, appreciates the poetry, because that the scripts, if not in performance, could be read as high literature. So they appreciate that, and then they could put that into music and perform. So there's something about how the art form came to the US in that way, preserved by these people, the intellectuals who are interested in the art form. And then with the proclamation of Kunqu, and then here in the US, of course, when the Kunqu Society presents program, usually this is something to promote Kunqu as a form of a very refined, elegant form of Chinese literature and art. And so what I notice is in the members that have been coming to that, who have joined the society, I notice that they are, for those who are from the younger generation, it seems to me that they found Kunqu interesting in that something that might connect them to the past, that history and literature is something, but also something new for them to learn. So that's kind of interesting for me to see that. And then and I am lacking the context, right, for China and Taiwan, but that's what I learned. So this is something they are not familiar with in their education. So there's something to learn about Kunqu. That's something new and interesting.
You mentioned the Kunqu Society, which you are a part of, and I think many listeners at this point might be wondering, how do you find out about where and when to see a performance? And if you do attend, what should newcomers look and listen for?
That I would say that of course that many of these activities occur within the Chinese communities. That something I should say is that as early as the mid 19th century, when Chinese immigrants came over to North America or the Americas, they also brought along the cultural arts practices, including theater. So earlier immigrants who were mainly from southern China, from the province of Guangdong, so they brought a regional form, Cantonese opera, here. And so for Kunqu came a bit later through probably the most prominent one, probably you also know. Men Nanfang was known as a Jingju performer, but actually he also performed Kunqu, plays in his repertoire. And so when he came over, he did perform some Kunqu pieces. And then, as I said, that there are some professors or Chinese immigrants who have the cultural knowledge and background. They enjoy Kunqu, and so they practice Kunqu first for self amusement, to seek mutual interest in that, and then later, like for example, the Kunqu Society was founded to promote and study and preserve the art form here in North America. So I would say when to look for Kunqu, probably if you have the language skills, that would be great to look for the Chinese like news outlets, etc. And then so you know that they are, because they are, in addition to the Kunqu Society, there are also other organizations, usually in bigger cities in North America. As long as there is a sizable Chinese community, probably you will be able to find like performance occurrences. I know in New York, Washington, D.C., in the Bay Area, in California, in Los Angeles, they are like groups. They have internal, gatherings in which they just sing and they get together and sing. Or they put on public performances, sometimes inviting guest artists from China, Taiwan to perform. And then some groups like the Kunqu Society will provide bilingual subtitles and program notes with hosts providing English explanations. And now with the internet, that you could also find some of these groups about their like Facebook pages, websites. So maybe this is a place I could provide some links, right? Then to provide some lists, places. And one thing I will mention is that there are also some cultural arts organizations. In the example that I know, for example, Flushing Town Hall is a place that promotes multiculturalism. So they promote all these, different cultural art practices from different cultures, and they presented some Kunqu programs as well. And it's definitely, their goal is really to promote the art form beyond the Chinese community, and definitely bilingual, and to make the art form more accessible.
So, as we've been talking about, Kunqu is this wonderfully complex art form. And as great as it's been talking with you, Dongshin, I'm sure listeners will want to be able to see and read about some of the material that we've been talking about. So we'll make sure to post more information, videos, images, all sorts of things so that people can explore the world of Kunqu. Dongshin, thank you so much for introducing us to this incredible art form.
You're very welcome, Mike, and thanks again for your invitation.
If you'd like to continue today's conversation, please visit theaterhistorypodcast.net and follow @theaterhistory on Twitter. Just a note, theater is spelled THEATRE in our website URL, and it's spelled TER at the end in our Twitter handle. Our theme music is The Black Crook Gallop, which comes to us courtesy of the New York Public Library Libretto Project and Adam Roberts. Thanks as well to Tip Kress, who designed our logo. And finally, thank you for listening.